critically analyzing global affairs. The Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, hello and a very warm welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, the glorious 12th of August. And here on the Muckrakers, we pledge to continue to tackle the most pressing and controversial news issues of our time. Our mission, as always, is to provide more light and less heat, although I've just discovered that the way to kill a scorpion is to shine light on it that another day. Basically, we can continue our unwavering quest to uncover the truth and to inform, educate and entertain with dignity and respect. And it's vital that we don't just ask the questions, but question the answers. Well, today we're going to talk about the development in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia and the quite shocking news that we've had in the last few hours. But also, to help to sort of unpack all of that, I'm delighted that I'm joined yet again by Martin J. and Dr. George Samueli. I've been practicing Martin's name all week. It's going to be good. Now, Martin, I've got to tell you, is an award-winning journalist. He's editor of the Maghrebi.org and Levantis.me. His career spans over 30 years, which has seen him work in over 50 countries. He has to keep moving. A host of big media titles. But what I love most of all is on his Twitter page, he proudly claims that he's been fired by all the media giants. And CNN, who I fully support always, good journalist, but a pain in the backside. I'm beginning to understand why. Dr. George Samueli is a senior research fellow at the Global Policy Institute in London. He's written for innumerable publications. And if you still haven't bought it, go out and get his brilliant book, Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia. Welcome back to you both, gentlemen.
Good to be with you, Andrew.
It's nice to see you. So last night, I want to start off this. We said au revoir to the Olympic Games in Paris. The star-studded farewell Paris Games. It featured performances from all of your favourites, the French indie band Phoenix. We also saw Tom Cruise did a stunt, and there was then Her and Red Hot Chili Peppers and Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre and Billie Eilish. What were the highlights for you, George?
Well, I always feel when the Olympics come to an end, a sense of relief, thank God that's over, because, you like all of these kind of global events that are hyped up and kind of enforced on the public that, you must take an interest in every aspect of this. You must get excited and enthusiastic about everything that's going on. So you finally, it's come to an end. For me, there weren't really that many highlights. Most of the events I just find ridiculous. Why they're even being in the Olympics? Why do we have golf in the Olympics? I mean, why do we have rugby in the Olympics? Why do we have football in the Olympics? Basketball. In other words, these are all big sporting events that have their own competitions, which are themselves big, spectacular, multi-million-dollar events televised around the world. And again, we're supposed to get very, very excited about them. So, I felt like, what did I, will remember? Well, I would just remember the kind of sporting events, a few sporting events in the Olympics that I find kind of interesting, which is mainly track and field. So, I thought the 100-meter event was an amazing. I've never seen anything like that, where nobody really knew who won that. And even however many times you see it, you still can't be sure which one of them really won. And if I come in second, I'd be a little aggrieved that I didn't get the gold medal, since my foot crossed the line first. But anyway, and then there were some events there, like the pole vault, which I always enjoy, the high jump, which I always enjoy. But the rest was, I thought, fairly mundane. I thought it was just like any other Olympic Games. And so in the end, with Olympics, you kind of think back on Olympics of the past and, which of them had any significance. Most of them didn't. Most of them, you now eminently forgettable. But there are one or two that maybe we can talk about, which are etched in memory, but for reasons other than sport.
Yeah, no, you make some very interesting. It was probably one of the most controversial Olympics we've had for a little time. What was your take on it, Martin?
I found the whole thing to be deeply boring. I didn't watch any of it. Sorry, I can't spend time in front of the TV watching sport. And the whole French kind of tableau around it as well, I found also off-putting. I do find it extraordinary. I'm going to upset our French viewers if we have any, but I do find it so extraordinary how the French sense of self-importance is always something that sticks with the mind with these international events, and I think it will be remembered for the opening ceremony, which was vulgar, stupid, woke, and just ill-conceived. The whole gender bender, LGBT nonsense, just absolutely vulgar on so many levels. And I think it will also be remembered for the boxing tournaments, the women's boxing tournaments, and this kept popping up on my timeline, so I know about it. The women boxing tournaments that were basically won by men who are in transition to becoming women, and those same boxers who were banned from other previous international events, managed to slip through the net and win their medals in Paris. So, and I think the final event last night, Tom Cruise, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and all that. The boss of the whole event made a little speech. His name was Monsieur Estanjo, if I pronounce his name correctly, and he said, "Together we lived the games as never seen before. A whale even took part in the surfing finals in Haiti. From one day to the next, time stopped, and the whole country vibrated." I mean, the idea of all those Frenchmen vibrating together at the same time, it did put me off somewhat. Enough to put you off your cornflakes. Can we get on with the other subjects? I just found it incredibly boring.
I think, well, I'll tell you what, one of the fascinating facts I found, apart from the glory of winning the medals, is that different countries celebrated in different ways. So the Philippines, for example, just a fascinating fact, Carlos Yulo, who won 2 Olympic gold medals in Paris, in addition to his 2 gold medals, he received £350,000 from the Philippines, plus some unusual rewards. He got car accessories, free wedding photography, haircuts, furniture, free food for life, and what I love best of all, he even gets some free colonoscopy. That's all worthwhile. So it is amazing, these sort of sponsorship deals. But you're right, we also said goodbye to Andy Murray, that he retired from tennis. And as you say, it was the most inclusive IOC games ever. They integrated a number of new sports, including climbing and skateboarding and breaking and surfing, all of your favourites, breakdancing, you love that sort of stuff. But Gay Paris was indeed front and centre. They criticised the scene at the beginning in the opening ceremony, where and they insisted it was the Greek god Dionysus rather than portraying the Last Supper. But rather sadly, Thierry Reboul, who was the ceremony's director, he received death threats about that, which is why they sort of toned the whole thing down. But just to pick you up on, as you did mention it, about the gender question in the boxing, so there were 2 images which will be the resonating ones in amongst everything else. There's Algerian boxer Imaine Khalif, who won the gold medal, and Taiwan's Lin Yu-ting on the medal podium. Basically, it will go down as some of the most untouchable in history. It raised all sorts of questions about men in women's sport and transitioning. But just as a point of information, Imaine Khalif was never has never transitioned. It was one of these sort of conditions where basically that she's always lived her life as a female, but in certain sports they have all sorts of strange tests about whether it's testosterone or so on and so forth. What we have to do is look at the rules and regulations. So it was the IOC, if you like, who basically said if you say you're female on your passport, that's what we're going to go with. But yes, interesting take on all of that. We'll see what happens next. Just on George's point about the wonderful 100 meters, AI and technology advanced so great. One of the great images I loved was the AI-powered cloud-based replay system, where it basically fused images from multiple camera angles, and so you could have these 3D reconstructions of wonderful, like a Matrix-style replays, if you like. And it was Omega's timing tech, which was used to create data-driven visualizations, and that's where you saw Noah Lyles. He won 0.005 of a second. So quite extraordinary. A happy release for people from the world, or do you think it's a distraction trying to cover something else? Final word, George. What do you think?
I don't think it's at all a happy release, and that's really the point, that's what's so phony about the Olympic Games, because and I was saying historically the greatest Olympic Games ever was the 1936 Berlin Olympics. It's immortalized in Leni Riefenstahl's remarkable film. And it was, up until then, the most spectacular Olympic event ever. And Germany romped home with all the medals. I mean, we all remember, of course, Jesse Owens, everything, but at the same time, Germany won most of the medals. But did that suggest that all peoples were coming together, that there was no, that somehow sport was ensured the transcendence of national and political differences? No, it didn't. And that's really the point, that there's something really phony about this a claim that somehow, we're playing sports and somehow this is bringing peace to the world. Who wasn't, you said inclusive. Well, who wasn't included? The Russians. The Russians were not included. And this wasn't even just before Ukraine. Russia has been steadily banned from these Olympics on the claim that they are doping. Well, does anyone really believe that no one else in the world in athletics is doping other than the Russians? This was entirely made up based on sort of the claims of one person who had worked for the Russian State Sporting Authority, that Russians were systematically doping. No real evidence had been presented of this. It's not like Russians were failing these doping tests, but nonetheless, the IOC steadily banned Russians, and this has now been, I think, ever since the 2016 Olympics, Russia has been banned from these events. And again, Russia which has always been a very strong sporting nation, wasn't there. So, Macron, who's presiding, we're bringing all these people together. Macron is one of the worst warmongers in Europe, as are the British. So, please don't tell us that we're taking part in sport and this is so great and we're bringing people together. You are doing exactly the opposite in your day-to-day existence.
Yeah, so some very interesting points. Well, we're going to come on to obviously the biggest topic today, which is about Ukraine and launching an attack on the Kursk region last Tuesday, and basically look at what's happening there and all of these sort of explosions and fires at nuclear plants and various other things as well, straight after these messages.
This is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, joined by Dr. George Samueli and Martin Jay. And having had their input on the Olympics and some very valid points about Russia, let's have a look at what the current situation is, because Ukraine has launched an attack on the Kursk region in what is the largest assault on Russian territory since the outbreak of the conflict. George, what's your take on all of this?
Well, at this stage, we know very little about the true state of affairs in Kursk, because neither the Russian government nor the Ukrainian government is revealing very much about the state of play. This was obviously a major onslaught involving probably at least thousands of armed men, armored vehicles, tanks, armored personnel carriers, missiles, drones, air power. So today is the seventh day, and the Ukrainians seem to be still dug in. How much territory they've taken is unclear, but it's maybe about 20 square. I mean, they're probably about 20 kilometers inside Kursk. How much territory they're actually in control of is unclear. So this is a real problem for Russia. I mean, it's a psychological problem, obviously, because they left their border undefended, even though they'd seen the previous attacks on the Belgorod region earlier in this year. But those were conducted by Russians, obviously under Ukrainian sponsorship. This is actually Ukrainian armed forces. So Russia's going to have a job pushing them out. I mean, I think Russia will push them out, but it's not going to be easy. The Ukrainians have learned to be very tough fighters. But there's other things going on. There's a crisis there going on between Ukraine and Belarus. That could certainly explode. And if some fighting takes place between Ukraine and Belarus, Russia will be forced to divert its forces. I mean, so far, Russians haven't diverted their forces from the Donbass into Kursk. That may change, but at the moment, it seems that they're still fighting and that they're only using conscripts in order to drive, the conscripts were based in Russia to drive out the Ukrainians. But if fighting breaks out between the Ukraine and Belarus, then I think Russia will be forced to take some of their forces out from the Donbass, and that would be quite a serious then issue, because that really does escalate the war if Belarus is involved. And then, of course, we have the events at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Ukraine, obviously, it was Ukraine that attacked the power plant. The International Atomic Energy Authority has more or less confirmed that it was an attack, and it doesn't make any sense for Russia to attack its own plant when they have Russians who are stationed at the plant. So things could be bubbling along into quite a serious crisis in the next few days.
It is worrying, isn't it? I mean, you're having a look at the sort of optics on this, and I was looking at Zelensky's post, and his sort of he often posts on X, as it now is. He says currently radiation levels are within norm. However, as long as the Russian terrorists maintain control over the nuclear power, the situation is not and cannot be normal. Since the first day of the seizure, Russia has been using the plant only to blackmail Ukraine, all of Europe and the world. We're waiting for the world to react, waiting for the IAEA to react. Russia must be held accountable for this. What's your take on that, Martin?
Yeah, he would say that, wouldn't he? You know, there's no evidence of that at all. Nothing. The idea that Russia is holding up this nuclear power plant as some sort of master play, you know, which it will play at some point, is that's ludicrous. You know, from day one, you know, journalists have always had their eye on this plant, and I think. I think a couple of weeks ago, I said on your show that sooner or later, Zelensky are going to fire a couple of rockets at it, strike a lucky hit, and then they will be feeding the media with stories of, look what Russia's doing. It's actually planning to blow up its own power plant, you know, to cause a wide scale environmental degradation, as well as even the threat to lives. It was inevitable that this was going to happen sooner or later. And I think the key thing here for me is 2 weeks ago, Zelensky had a phone call with Trump. And for me, that changes now the prism of how we interpret all news that comes from the Ukraine war, because basically Zelensky and his cabal are preparing for a Trump victory, and Trump has made it very, very clear that he's going to play very hard ball with Zelensky over the territories in Donetsk and Luhansk. Territories that are taken by Russia, but there's a small part of it which is being held by the Ukrainians as well. And Trump has made it very clear you're going to have to give up either the territory that you already have in those areas and let Russia keep the rest, or give up the whole of those two key territories which are Russian-speaking. You know, it's not clear which, but he's signaled until now that he wouldn't do that. Those territories are off limits. And so the way we can look at this invasion into the Russian side is, I think, quite a masterly plan, a very bold plan, and we can say in the short term, quite successful. You know, we can salute the Ukrainian army for seeing a weak spot and going for it, but that's not the test. The test is whether they can hold it. You know, and that's a really bigger question now. You know, as George points out, does Putin move troops from Donbass or other areas into this new location, or does he allow the Ukrainians to take vacation of it, you know, to hold it, which will absorb a number of troops, number of bits of hardware, which could be used elsewhere in the war? And does he plan on himself looking for pockets of points of weakness, you know, where he can actually play a hand back, you know, to also play the media game? Because I think that's what really this is. I think this is a media game, and I think Zelensky is now thinking, if Trump gets in November and plays hardball, I need all of the aces in my pack to play, so that there is some negotiation on my side, that I have something. At the moment, it looks like analysts look at the negotiation, the possible negotiation, and they say, well, there's nothing the Ukrainians have got. You know, Russia basically holds all the aces. The only thing you could play is you could guarantee never to join NATO. You could guarantee to maybe clean up a bit the far right extremist groups you've got. But when you talk about these regions, it starts to get much more complicated. So I think it's not just a military play. It's not just a military coup that he's pulled off. I think it's also about the possible negotiations that might be coming in the longer term. And, he may well be hoping that Russia sends troops from other posts. There is another key part of that borderline, which is a couple of 100 miles away, where Russia recently took villages on the Ukrainian.
Oh, I can't hear you. For some reason, I can no longer hear you. Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. You seem to be breaking up. We lost you for a little bit there. I don't know if you can still hear me. But you make some very interesting points about Trump's involvement with all of this. And Trump is due to give an interview with Elon Musk later today. He's also due back on X, as it now is called. And you might recall that the last time he was on X, there was this glorious shot of him here, which is a long time, when he basically capitalized on the mugshot that he had when he was arrested. Mugshot, August 24th, 2023, election interference, never surrender, DonaldTrump.com. And you might recall that he raised millions as a result of it. But his role in how this is going to affect the war between Ukraine and Russia is quite interesting. Do you share Martin's opinion, George?
Not entirely. I mean, it's possible that Zelensky is thinking along those lines. But in the first place, it's by no means clear that Trump will win. It may have been clear a month ago when Biden was still the Democratic Party would-be nominee that Trump will win. Trump was comfortably ahead in the polls. So, he's now basically, at least it's drawn level with Kamala Harris. So it's not at all clear that he will win. The other thing is that I don't think Trump has exactly thought out how he's going to bring this to an end. I'm not at all sure that that's, his line will be where you have to give up territory to Russia. That may be how Viktor Orban, who has had conversations with him, Viktor Orban has interpreted what Trump is saying, because Trump is someone who tells people what they want to hear. And I think Orban wanted to hear that. And so, Trump seemed to suggest to him that would be his goal. But nonetheless, the things that Trump is saying, he's saying that, hey, I did the most for Ukraine to be able to fight off Russia. And the people who would be part of the Trump team, and they've all spoken out. They've written articles in Foreign Affairs. There are people who, from the America First Policy Institute. They're all kind of saying that, what Trump would do is continue the war, but shift some of the burden onto the Europeans. So that somehow the Europeans should do more of the heavy lifting. Now, all I'm saying is that it's not at all clear which way Trump's going to go. I'm not saying Trump is going to escalate the war, though it's possible, or that Trump will bring it to an end, which is also possible. So I don't really know. I think it's much more on the part of Zelensky to inflict a certain level of pain and humiliation on Russia. Because at the moment, Russia hasn't taken out any of the forces from the Donbass. The fighters in the Donbass, those are battle-hardened, and they're good, experienced fighters. So obviously it would make sense for Russia to take them out to take care of this problem in Kursk. Instead, Russia is likely to use conscripts. Well, the problem with using conscripts is that they are not battle-hardened, they're inexperienced, and they're likely to suffer heavy casualties. This has already happened. There was a convoy that was sent to Kursk towards the end of last week, and that was obviously, it was just obliterated. So there were already severe casualties. I think Zelensky is figuring that Russia will come to the conclusion that it cannot win this war at this snail's pace, at this sort of special military operation, and that Russia will be forced to introduce mobilization. And then he thinks that Putin's going to have some serious political problems. And he's kind of hinted at this, and that's his calculation, that Russia has been reluctant up until now to order a full mobilization. For all the talk of this is existential and so on, it's only been a partial mobilization. But what happens if Russia undertakes a full mobilization? I mean, Russia at the moment is patriotic and supports Putin, but who knows what happens if it's a full mobilization? That's, I think, is Zelensky's calculation, and I think that's why he's also trying to stir up problems in Belarus, because again, that's going to force Russia to help out his friend Lukashenko. And there's still another fly in the ointment, which is what happens if there's trouble in Moldova with Transnistria. Russia has no border with Moldova, so if the Transnistrians, where ethnic Russians are under attack, again, Russia has to do something, and it's going to be very, very difficult given that it doesn't have a border with Moldova. So I think, Zelensky is kind of juggling a lot of balls in the air, trying to put pressure on Russia.
Yeah, I mean, you make some excellent points. I mean, social media is going into meltdown when we talk about Ukraine saying it's a proxy war and so on and so forth. Eleanor makes a good point about the Olympics as well, saying that was basically a distraction for 2+ weeks to get the eyes off Gaza and Ukraine and so on and so forth. Is that a fair summary, do you think, Martin? I can't hear Martin for some reason. Can we hear Martin? Are you still there?
Hear me now. Can you hear me now?
Okay, so there we go. I think that little mute button, or you've got to go petting backs or whatever. Can you hear us now?
He's back. The question about the Olympics. I thought we would stay with.
No, we're definitely staying. It's basically Eleanor was sort of saying that it's been a distraction, and whilst people are doing that, a lot of people are sort of turning around and saying actually a proxy war is what's happening for NATO and that sort of side. What's your take on that?
That's the risk. I mean, that's the big risk that he's playing. We've had this game of chicken, if you want to call it that, of always cranking up the stakes, escalation, which NATO have played very well. They've always assumed that no matter how far you push Putin will not want to engage in a real full-on war with NATO outside of the boundaries of Ukraine. But I wonder how far you can take that game, because if Zelensky, if we can give him the credit for being so smart as to go into Kursk and to take this particular region and maybe even go for a second one, who knows, in the coming weeks, the pressure on Putin is very, very high. You have to remember that when Putin went into Ukraine, initially people thought that it would be nothing. The Russians were not imagining that this regional problem with Ukraine would actually spill over into Russia. And so now, the headlines that are in Russian media now, which Putin really didn't imagine could have come about, which is that now Ukraine is actually threatening Russians, and Russian people are being killed, and Russian people are having to move out of their homes and their regions. That is really putting pressure on Putin, because he knows that he has to do something about that very quickly. The worry is, from a Western geomilitary perspective, the worry is that he reaches a breaking point and his patience snaps and he decides, okay, now I've had enough. Now this is now going to be a regional war. You're hitting my people outside of Ukraine, then why shouldn't I hit military installations in Poland, for example? Isn't that fair game? And then what does NATO do? I'm absolutely certain NATO would then have to back down, because NATO does not have the political clout, the courage, the verve at all for a full-out war. But it's very interesting that, in the last few days we're hearing in tandem to the Kursk invasion, if we can call it that, we're also hearing more and more about F-16s buzzing around all over the place now. Further down the south, there were reports yesterday of a couple, and I'm just wondering how that can possibly be, given that you need to take pilots and give them minimum 6 months training on the F-16s, minimum 6 months. So these F-16s have been delivered in the last few weeks from the Netherlands. They're old generation planes. But if we're going to see more of those in the skies, and Zelensky is thinking of using air power now to take more regions, to punch little pocket holes, in the perimeter, then I can tell you we are moving into a really, really dangerous zone now. And it's no longer going to be called a proxy war if things start to get out of control. So we cannot really call this a victory so far. It's an interesting battle that he's won briefly, but I think we need to judge how Putin reacts in the next few days, whether he can actually sustain that small pocket or whether he will be forced to eliminate it. And then what? Then Zelensky looks even more stupid and more weak and more confused as ever.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we've made this point before here on the Muckrakers that a lot of the weapons being supplied, a lot of the F-16s and so on and so forth, it takes not just months, sometimes years to train up properly on them. So the only way you can do that is to supply a pilot as well. In the case of the F-16s, what's your take on that, George?
No, I think it is a very dangerous situation. So, but if there are Western pilots, I think there probably are. They are probably not active servicemen. They're probably just mercenaries, recently retired from the armed forces. That would give the NATO powers a certain plausible deniability. Well, we're not actually directly involved. These are people who have retired. They've taken some cash and are doing it. But there's no question that. There will be a point at which Russia will say enough is enough. I think that probably that's something that Russia should have taken really some time ago, because it was obvious that this is how NATO was going to play it, that they were going to say, well, they were pushing and pushing and pushing, and every time you pointed out, you say you're facilitating the war. They say no, we're not we're not a participant in this conflict. We're not a party to this conflict, and this is how they've been getting away with it. It's very interesting how deceitful the Americans have been, because remember when for the first time the Biden administration, I think it was in May, said, you can use American weapons in Russian territory, but only as part of this operation to defend Kharkov. So you can attack Russian armed formations attacking Kharkov. Then they changed that and said, well, you can use American weaponry on Russian territory in anticipation of any Russian attacks on Ukraine. But now basically, they were asked, the White House was actually asked, hey, you're using American weaponry in Kursk. Is that the Biden administration policy? Yes, again, no, there's been no change in policy. So now they're pretty much saying, you can do that. But they're still going to insist, well, we're not a party to the conflict. And then we get to the point where it may be that Russia should just simply say, all right, fine, we're going to start hitting targets maybe in Poland or Romania. And then you put it to NATO and say, all right, then what are you going to do about it? I mean, you talk about Article 5. Are you really ready to go to war? Because this has been a nice little holiday for you. You send the weapons, let others get killed, and then you scream, hey, we're not in this. We're not a party to the conflict. So now you say, all right, are you ready now to be a party to the conflict? And then we'll see. I mean, I tend to agree with Martin. I don't think they are ready to be an active party to the conflict, but it's probably the most effective way of bringing this war to an end.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be continuing the deeper dive into Ukraine and looking a bit more at the nuclear plants and whether this really could be a false flag. Come back after these breaks.
The Muckrakers are restless. This is today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, joined yet again by George Samueli and Martin J. And thank you for all of the brilliant comments all coming through about false flags and Ukraine's involvement and proxy wars and all that sort of stuff. Keep that coming. I do want to look at this nuclear plant and the attack and the suggestion that Zelensky made that it was a false flag. What would Russia have to gain by starting the fire, George?
I don't think it would have anything to gain. I think it's completely nonsensical. I think it's something that Zelensky is putting out, knowing that there are obviously many pockets of Western media that are ready to echo this. And this has already happened. The Guardian, the Politico are repeating without any evidence at all Zelensky's claims. But absolutely, Russia wouldn't have anything to gain. Now, it may be that Zelensky is planning on seizing the Kursk nuclear power plant. But he's still some way from that, and maybe he thinks that if he gets that they could do some kind of a swap. Well, I really, really give that up in Kursk, and then Russia gives up Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. I mean, he may be thinking that. But first of all, Ukraine has to capture that Kursk nuclear power plant. And I think there still seems to be some way from that. That may be what he's thinking. But I think it's more likely that he's just juggling as many balls in the air as he can, hoping that something or other is going to set things off.
Martin?
Yeah, I think he's right. It is about juggling, isn't it? He's got a lot of balls to juggle, and I think he's looking at all possible options now. Now running up from now until December or the end of November, when we get a result from the US election. It's awkward for him because that particular power plant, from what I understand, it's one of the largest in the world, and so it's quite a prize, and it must be very, very annoying for the Ukrainians that the Russians control it. But it's been closed down. I mean, it's got six of its reactors, I think, are in cool shutdown, or a couple of them are in hot shutdown, which is, I understand, is a partial way of shutting them down. But they're quite difficult to strike because of the way the Russians built them. It's an incredibly strong power plant. You can't just bomb it with anything. You need to bomb it with very, very sophisticated, very high-grade, heavy bombing, continuous, just to break through one of them. So some of the scaremongering, isn't actually even relevant. And the IEA are there as well, and we rely very heavily on them to give us more, neutral reporting. They are the ones who confirmed just recently that they were told, the Russians told them that it was a drone attack that created this particular fire, which looked like plastic burning, actually, plastic or tires burning or anything. But the Russians are not. Also, we shouldn't be so. We should be skeptical also about the Russians. The Russians are also not angels. They're capable of playing with the media as well, and so we may not find for quite some time what the truth is about the power plant and whether it was actually hit. But I imagine, if I had to put money on it, I would imagine that it's going to be a regular target from now on. I think the Ukrainians are going to hit it whenever they can. And if they have now F-16s buzzing around, and I think George's point about the retired US pilots is absolutely bang on. I mean, I heard a few reports myself of some very discreetly placed advertisements in American pilot magazines, for retired pilots to sign up to a scheme. And I would imagine these are American retired pilots. I can't imagine them being Ukrainian. I've heard from a few sources that I trust very well that there's only actually 6 Ukrainian pilots in Kyiv who are actually able to even be trained. So we have to assume that these American pilots are in the air. And at the moment, I think it's just a PR stunt. You have them buzzing around and you get very good coverage on Twitter. Lots of people are posting videos about these F-16s. And it always looks as though there's more than there actually is. I mean, it could be 2 F-16s which are buzzing around all over the country. And it just looks like, there's dozens of them. But I think so far, when we talk about the power plant, it seems to be a media stunt to me. The real issue of attacks which really do affect the environment. It was more really, we should be talking about the dam which the Russians blew up a few months ago, which did have a huge environmental impact, which did kill people. This power plant isn't really a story. And I think it's used as a tool. And as George quite rightly points out, when you're in Zelensky's position and you have an entire bank of Western journalists from all of the big media guns who are just waiting like little baby sparrows with their mouths open, to be fed the material and to process it in record time and get it out there, then it's hardly surprising that he will spin these stories, and they will get carried away. But I think really, the power plant story is really a media ruse, if nothing else. We shouldn't put too much emphasis on it.
I have to agree with you, and from what I can see, what I love about the Muckrakers is that we try and get as many different experts and talk to as many different people as possible, because just asking the questions, and to me, when you see the optics with all the billowing black smoke, it looks horrendous, and you can see that's going to be the headline. You can see that's going to be reported all over the world. So what I asked our brilliant producer Jeremy to do is to try and find out some engineers and others, people who might be experts at these sort of things, and basically they're saying there's not a lot of flammable material in a cooling tower. But we managed to find this French engineering professor, Damien Ernst, and he was suggesting it was the packing of the cooling tower that was burning. It's a set of grills of plastic material that separate the water in the tower and activate the contact between the fluids, and therefore the cooling process. By burning them, you'll get that big black smoke, which is great for the photos, rather similar to burning tires. And the black smoke is very visual for anyone wanting to create panic, just rather like steam, water vapor. And you might recall that a lot of people were saying that these are terrible about carbon pollution. They were talking about these particular plants, when effectively what it was just steam. Do you think this is effectively what it is, George? Is it just trying to get the optics, trying to make it look as dramatic as possible?
Yeah, I think so. It's very good news. Get some PR, all the, more evidence of how evil the Russians are. But one thing that is, that isn't getting proper attention is something that I already alluded to earlier, which is the issue with Belarus. Now, Belarus is a small country, small relative to Ukraine. It has a border with Poland, and there have been indications in the past that NATO would regard it as a red line if Belarus got involved in this war against Ukraine, that might trigger a direct NATO intervention. And so I think that this tension that's now brewing on the border between Ukraine and Belarus, I think is driven by, Zelensky's desire to provoke some kind of a reaction from Belarus. I wouldn't be surprised if Zelensky will pull a Kursk-like stunt in Belarus. He invades Belarus, seizes a piece of territory, and then waits for what happens next. And then if Russia, Russia is then obligated to come in on, because, Russia takes its collective security treaty organization obligations seriously. Russia will be obligated to come in and fight on Belarus's behalf. Then he would have to just start taking some serious forces out from the Donbass to liberate any territory. But then you also have to see what's NATO going to do in those cases. It has said that it regards that as a red line. I don't know why it said it, but it did say it, in the past, it regarded somehow Belarus getting involved would be a red line. So I think that's something to look out for, as well as the Kursk. And I agree with Martin. I don't think this the nuclear power plant issue is. I think that's just a smoke screen, so to speak.
Smoke screen.
Yes, a very, very effective smoke screen for some. Martin?
Yeah, the Zaporozhye power plant, I think story is going to stay with us for a few days. You can see that the media are going to run with it, because that picture is so iconic, the black smoke and everything. But George talking about Belarus, that's serious. I mean, that's a really, really different level now of seriousness when we talk about escalation, and that's something that we should really keep an eye on for the longer time. But again, I can't help feeling that somebody like Zelensky, who has made such an impact on media through being a clown on television and a comedian and doing everything he's done, he's a guy who I think really does understand media and understands really well how to play it. And in the last couple of days, we've heard stories of him wanting to create a referendum in the country. And, what does that mean? A referendum whereby he asks his own people how do you feel about us giving up these particular territories in the event of negotiations for peace? And you have to ask yourself, what's that all about? Is he serious about what he's talking about? Is he trying to play the statesman, the so-called, apparently democratically elected president? Because one of the things you've got to understand about Ukraine, and Ukrainians are beginning to think about this more and more, is that Zelensky, as a president, is losing his credibility. His mandate ran out, God knows when, months ago. And he's in no position and does not want to break away from the martial state, because the moment he does that, then people will say, okay, well, we're not at war anymore, we've got to hold elections. He doesn't want elections. He knows he won't win an election. And so he is now trying to conjure up this image and to present himself as the statesman, as the one who really believes in democracy and pluralism in his own country. And we need to reach out to people and get their opinions on these rather, hot subjects. But the skeptic in me also thinks that perhaps this is another game, another ploy, another ruse that he might play to gain some sort of a ceasefire, because it's only to his advantage. And I think the Russians know this. Russians are not stupid, they're serious people. Zelensky probably is trying to work out a way of getting a ceasefire for a month or two so that he can rearm, he can reposition, he can give his frontline troops a break, they can go back. It's very good for morale. And, one of the things we didn't touch on about Kursk is that the third or fourth scenario that George and I have unraveled is that it's a huge boost for the morale of the troops, of the Ukrainian troops, to have something like Kursk. So that may well have been part of the strategy as well. Other than all of the points we laid out, what a great way of injecting some raw energy into the veins of demoralized soldiers. Where we know that the biggest problem that Zelensky has, the number one problem of scores, the top of the list, is he hasn't got the numbers. He hasn't got the numbers on the infantry. And this is the real desperate point in the war. So, there's lots of smoke and mirrors there to navigate your way through. And I think everything now that we're going to see in the next 6 months should be interpreted with a very, very skeptical slant.
Well, and you make an interesting point that Zelensky has an advantage in keeping the war, because you say he would lose an election, rather similar to what's going on in Gaza and Netanyahu, I think, on that basis. Did you share that view, George?
I do. There is a similarity between the game that Zelensky is playing and the game that Netanyahu is playing, which is you have to pretend to be interested in negotiations. You have to pretend to be interested in a ceasefire. Because otherwise, then your patrons get a little embarrassed. And so Netanyahu has been playing this game. Oh, yeah, we're negotiating with Hamas. We're very close and so on. And of course, he has no interest in this. And so Zelensky puts out these stories that, we're going to have another peace conference. And this time, Russia will be invited. And of course, Russia said, well, we're not going to go into any kind of a meaningless conference where we just get attacked and berated by 50 different states. And then, of course, oh, look, it's Russia that isn't interested in peace talks. It's obviously a psychological game. And so that's why he puts out these things like referendum. And again, this is certainly the Trump factor. You have to show Trump that you're serious about negotiations. It doesn't mean you're serious about making any concessions, but you have to show that you are serious about talks. Definitely we're going to have talks. Let's think about a referendum. But there's also the aspect that this operation in Kursk has had a desired effect. More money is being released, and the Americans need to feel. And the Americans are the people who matter here. They need to feel that Ukraine is doing something. It's not just digging in and being pushed out of one village after another. It's actually doing something. It's taking the fight to the Russians. That encourages the Americans that, hey, this is a good investment. We need to keep this going. Look, they've inflicted a humiliation on Putin. Hey, this is money well spent. This is the way they talk in Washington. Hey, this is money well spent. Look at how many Russians we've killed today. So it's already had that effect, that it's released some money. And of course, Martin's absolutely right. Kursk, because it has the famous connotation of World War II, the greatest battle in world history. For Russians now to be fighting to expel an invader from Kursk, that has definite, psychological factors for Russians as well as Ukrainians.
Yeah, so some fascinating points. We sadly have run out of time again. We will be revisiting this. I thought some excellent points about reinstating that raw energy into the troops. And I think the optics on this for the media, we would, as always, urge everybody to question everything. I was fascinated to read those reports from the engineers about what might have caused it. Some people have even suggested that Zelensky and his people may have actually dropped some things in there to make it look even more dramatic for the purposes of the media. All that and many more we'll continue to unpack here on the Muckrakers. But for now, Martin J. and Dr. George Samueli, thank you very much for joining me, and I will see the rest of you again tomorrow.